Before he answers that, there's nothing in our policy that says ignore the feds. So,
I believe that.
That's a choice of words.
Right.
Frame.
Well, we're very good in this building of taking words and shaping them to what we want them to mean. But
Yes.
But
I'm gonna let him.
But understand that 20 votes here and 53 on the other side, you can make a monkey look like a football. So don't So. Anyway.
But there's nothing in our policy that says ignore the feds. This couldn't be further from the truth. But I'll let him break down the specifics of what happens when we see a criminal warrant versus an administrative warrant that we don't see.
Okay.
Criminal warrant be treated like any other warrant. We will detain a person, take him into custody, verify the warrant, take him over to the sheriff's office, and then we reprocess accordingly. An administrative warrant by ICE on admission, they're trying to take that out of the system anyway, so there's very few in NCIC anyway. If it comes up in NCIC, an administrative warrant, then we will not take any enforcement action on that. However, if it's not labeled as an administrative warrant and it's unsure, but they come up as a warrant, we do contact the 800 number, which is the hotline for ICE, to verify if in fact it's a criminal warrant or administrative warrant.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Newell Norman, the Sheriff of Jefferson Parish, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss House Bill number 1148. At first blush, I guess my first comment would be, this is a Washington problem that begs of a Washington solution. I can't seal the deal. There's no one here in the state that can seal the deal on immigration. We don't have the authority, plain and simple. And the fact of the matter is House Bill 1148 places us in a real precarious situation of possibly losing grant funding, bond commission approval on bonds, state supplemental pay, and all kinds of other things for an incredibly slippery slope that we didn't create. The Washington solution simply has to be, if you want to get serious about immigration, then fund it. Fund it and let federal law enforcement deal with the issues that need to be dealt with so that we can craft policies and procedures that align with the federal immigration law enforcement practice. Plain and simple. So as I go through this bill, and let me just say this, in 2014, there was an article written about the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office. We deported more illegal aliens than any other county in the country per capita. So I have been tough on immigration. I have the same concerns about civil warrants, although I do work with immigration on civil warrants when I'm able to do so, and the resources, the limited resources that I have, allow me to do so. But I can't just have an overarching political philosophy that's being handed down here in Louisiana and playing Washington politics over an issue and have the people of my community suffer for the sake of some overarching political philosophy. It makes absolutely no sense to me. And I am just incredulous that we're sitting here in Baton Rouge discussing these issues when we look at this bill, that any policy that removes an employee's discretion relative to some federal law enforcement issue that our community could suffer before the bond commission, could suffer the loss of grant dollars and or state supplemental pay. That is absolute craziness. What are we doing? If I can't seal the deal, why would I have a policy that dictates that I do something that immigration is not going to help me with? It makes absolutely no sense. I have a policy in my department because we have jail overcrowding. I let felons out for free every month. 3 times the public has voted down a new jail for our area. That's fine. I'll live within those confines. That begs of me, as a law enforcement leader, to adopt policies to get the biggest bang for our buck and to provide safety in our community. And let me remind you, in Jefferson Parish last year, the lowest crime rate year since 1974. So when we look at the prioritization and we grade every inmate that rolls into our facility, we do not take into consideration immigration status for releases. As I read this bill, any order, ordinance, rule, law enforcement policy, or guideline, whether formally or informally adopted, that provides for any of the following, limits the discretion of the political subdivision employee from communicating or cooperating with federal agencies. Immigration has adopted a program called the Priority Enforcement Program, and that's how they deal with illegal immigrants today. Priority 1, gang members, 1 felony conviction, 1 aggravated felony conviction, suspected of terrorism, espionage, or threat to national security. Those are the ones that they will deal with first. Only 2 of those categories do not require a conviction: gang members and suspected terrorists. All others do. Why in God's creation would I adopt a policy to go holding all of these people when immigration isn't coming to get them? Why would I do that? Why would I waste my limited resources in establishing a policy, and then this body wants to place an additional sanction on me, and not only me, but one of my deputies, to lose state supplemental pay? Absolute craziness. I can't seal the deal. If I could seal the deal, I'd be all over this. No problem. But I can't seal it, and I can't compel immigration to do more than what their priorities are set forth by their policy. Which gets me back to Washington problem begs of a Washington solution. Priority 2, significant misdemeanor convictions, DUI, domestic violence, gun-related. Gun-related is in priority 2. Give me a break, right? Drug sales, sexual abuse, priority 2. Give me another break. Burglary, any other conviction if sentenced to 90 days or more, 3 or more misdemeanor convictions of any kind. The Priority Enforcement Program has been designed to make monitoring more difficult for us, especially as they're presented into our booking facilities and what we're going to ultimately do. Now, I'm doing it, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost. Some of us have the capacity to do it. Do I do it 100% of the time? No. Because when it's going cuckoo crazy in the booking section and we've got 140 or we got a roundup and 200, I promise you there are those that slip through the cracks and it's not happening. Because we have our own priorities. We have our own challenges. But my grading system of grading inmates for their propensity for violence within our jail does not take into effect immigration status, so I would be violative of House Bill 1148. I love that this bill takes away my ability to manage my employees. This bill tries to restrict me as a manager as it relates to adopting internal policies as to what my employees can do. My frontline officer, if I do anything as it relates to his discretion in regards to immigration, I can be violative of this bill. And that's in section 3A. What are we doing? I'm elected by the public. I'm a constitutionally created office. And now I can't set up a supervisory review or program within my organization. Every police report that's generated is reviewed by a supervisor. And if my supervisor begins reviewing this and it's deemed to be taking the discretion away from this officer, I'm violative of this particular statute. This bill goes on in section F, which really, to me, kind of gets all over the profiling issue. I gotta file more reports on racial profiling, and we have more training on profiling and everything else that goes along that, and the chief's right. In order to get it, and then we get involved in this immigration issue, the money that it's gonna cost us in order to shield us from any potential liability is like over the top. I mean, where does it end? As it relates to that, because I know, in most conversations, what we're predominantly talking about here is the Hispanic community. They're not the only illegal immigrants. That's all we ever talk about, but they're not the only ones. So we have to go into this whole, plethora of training as it relates to this issue. Then, in section C on page 3, I have to provide each law enforcement officer with a printed copy of the provisions of this chapter and with written notice of the duty to cooperate with state and federal agencies and officials on matters pertaining to enforcement of state and federal laws. My officers don't have the absolute discretion to cooperate with the state. That's my obligation. I set the priorities. I set the strategies. I set all of those things as it relates to that, not my employees. We decide what task forces we're going to serve on. We decide what we're going to do with our state partners. I decide what we're going to do with our federal partners. If I limit their discretion in any of this, and now they're telling me that I have to go tell my employees that you have this discretion and you can do whatever you want as it relates to immigration, contrary to what the sheriff desires. I don't get it. I don't get that at all. What I don't see in the bill are any funds to us to implement all of this stuff. Once again, another mandate, for us to have to deal with all of these particular issues. I don't get any from the federal government. I don't get any from the state government. And yet, I'm being burdened with all of these additional obligations as it relates to this in order to comply with some overarching political philosophy that comes out of Washington. Once again, Washington problem begs of a Washington solution. And it just doesn't make sense to me that my office, going back to what I said before, deported more illegal aliens than any other community in the country per capita, and I'm subject to being punished? I don't get it. Even when I'm cooperating, I have the possibility of being punished. And this whole thing seems to be, to go against the city of New Orleans. I reviewed their policy. Their policy is not a sanctuary city policy by any stretch of the imagination. Their practice, much like mine, tries to dovetail into what the enforcement policy is by federal immigration. And it would be a waste of time, money, and effort for us to have a more restrictive policy than what federal immigration law enforcement is willing to do when we can't seal the deal. As it relates to the civil detainers, let me just make one final comment. In my department, my officers are prohibited from getting involved in state civil actions. It's not what we do. We are a criminal law enforcement agency. However, now we seem to try to carve out that we're going to have an affirmative obligation to get involved in federal civil action. That's completely contrary to what criminal law enforcement agencies have been doing in this state and across this country forever and a day. I don't understand why we would want to create this new affirmative obligation and then have sanctions if we don't do it. Thank you.
Sheriff, we do have a few questions for you. Senator Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.